In this video, we're going to talk about projectile motion, and we solve word problems that involve projectile motion using quadratic equations. So projectile motion is when you throw something or something drops and it travels in a parabola shape or a U shape. So when we talked about parabolas before, we usually saw them in a U shape or it was a regular U shape facing up. Projectile motion, everything's traveling in an upside down parabola or an upside down U shape. So you can see that here, here, and here. All of those are U shapes, so they're all projectile motion following that shape of a parabola. When you have a word problem where you have something that's thrown or kicked and it's projectile motion, you're always going to use this equation, where G stands for gravity. Typically, the word problems are in feet, so most of the time you're going to use 32 for gravity. T is time in seconds, so you've got two different T's in there. V, and you would read that sub-zero with a little zero at the bottom. V sub-zero stands for initial velocity or initial speed, when something's taking off or coming out of your hand when you're throwing it. And then H sub-zero is the initial height. This height over here, this H over here, where it's H equals, that stands for the height that you're trying to find, depending on if the ball is going to hit the ground or if it's going to land somewhere above the ground. So this is always the height that you start with. This is the height that you end with. So let's look at an example word problem. This says, Sammy throws a basketball to Johnny. The initial height of Sammy's basketball is 3 feet, and the initial velocity is 10 feet per second. What's the equation? So, the general form for an equation was H equals negative 1/2 gt squared plus v sub 0 t plus h sub 0. So when it tells us the initial height of Sammy's basketball is 3 feet, that is h sub 0 is 3. The initial velocity is 10 feet per second, so that was v sub 0 is 10. So we're going to plug those into our equation to get a general form. So h equals negative 1/2. We're also going to plug gravity in. If you look back, gravity, if we're talking about feet, is 32. So G is going to be 32. So negative 1/2 times 32 t squared plus the v sub 0 is 10, so 10t plus, and then h sub 0 was 3. So we're just going to simplify this if we can between these two. Negative 1/2 times 32 is negative 16. Everything else is going to stay the same. So negative 16t squared plus 10t plus 3. So our general formula is h equals negative 16t squared plus 10t plus 3. So we're going to use that in the next part of the word problem. So this says, Johnny misses the ball. When will it hit the ground? So let's just kind of imagine what's happening. We've got a ball that's about 3 feet off the ground because that was the initial height, and it's getting thrown at a friend, but he misses it, and it's going to land on the ground. We want to know, when is it going to land on the ground? So we want the time that it takes to go from his hand at 3 feet, traveling all the way to the ground. We're going to use the equation that we had on the other page. So h equals negative 16t squared plus 10t plus 3. So with this equation, if we're trying to find when the ball is going to hit the ground, this height right here is 0. Because at the ground there is no height. So we're going to plug 0 in for h, because we're ending at 0 feet because it's on the ground. So 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 10t plus 3. Now once we have that, we're going to use the quadratic formula to solve for t, time, because we're trying to figure out how long, the time that it takes to travel that parabola shape and end on the ground. So we're going to use the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. And everything's divided by 2a. Using the quadratic formula to solve for t. So here's a, b, and c. We're going to plug in. So negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 3. And then everything is divided by 2 times a, so 2 times negative 16. It becomes negative 10 plus or minus the square root of. So you're just going to plug the inside of the square root in your calculator, just what's in there. And it should give you 292. And then divide it by 2 times negative 16 should give you negative 32. It's going to give you about x equals 0.8. So remember, we are solving for time, and you can't have negative time. There is no negative time. It's not possible. So this answer doesn't make sense, negative 0.2, because you can't have negative time, and we were solving for time. So t equals 0.8 seconds is our final answer, because that is the positive answer. You can't have negative time. So let's look at another example, the next part of the question. So this says, when will Johnny catch the ball at 3.5 feet? So we go back to this picture that I drew before. We've got two people. The one is throwing the ball from about 3 feet. That was the initial height. And now we're throwing it in this shape. And we're trying to figure out when is it going to be that height. So, and that height would be 3.5 feet. So we want to know, when is it going to be 3.5 feet? When is it going to reach 3.5 feet? So we're using that same equation that we used before. H equals negative 16t squared plus 10t plus 3. The only thing that's going to change is, before h was 0 because we were trying to figure out when it was going to hit the ground. Now h is going to be 3.5 because we want to know when will the ball reach 3.5 feet. So now instead of 0 equals the equation, it's 3.5 equals the equation, or 3.5. So everything else is pretty much the same, just that part changed. We're still going to use the quadratic formula, but remember, when you use the quadratic formula, it has to be equal to 0. So we're going to have to subtract 3.5 from both sides. Now that it's equal to 0, we can use quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. And then everything is divided by 2a, where a, b, and c are what we're going to plug in. So it's negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times negative 0.5. And then everything is divided by 2 times negative 16. So we're just going to put the inside of the square root into our calculator. So just the inside of the square root should give us 68. And then we're going to divide 2 times negative 16 gives us negative 32. Now take the square root of 68. Should give you about 8.2. To divide by negative 32, and that's going to give you 0.6 about. So remember, we are solving for time. We wanted to know how long it took to get to 3.5 feet. We're going to pick the bigger answer. So it's 0.6 seconds. That's how long it took to get to 3.5 feet. So we're going to look at one more part of this problem. It says, what will the height be after 0.42 seconds? So if you go back to this drawing that I had, where we were throwing the ball, and it's going to take that U shape. We want to know, where is the ball going to be after 0.42 seconds? So we want to know, is it going to be up here? Is it going to be here, here, here? Where is it going to be after 0.42 seconds? So we're looking for a height, a distance. How high is it going to be? We're using the same equation that we did for all the parts so far. So negative 16t squared plus 10t plus 3. This time we're given a time. We're told that the time is 0.42 seconds. What's the height? So we're going to plug 0.42 in for t. So negative 16 times 0.42 squared plus 10 times 0.42 plus 3. And this is going to give us the height. You're just going to plug that all into your calculator. Make sure you use parentheses wherever there are parentheses. So once you plug that into your calculator, you should get about 4.4. Now this is a height, so it's 4.4 feet. So after 4.2 seconds, it's going to be 4.4 feet high. So somewhere up here at 4.4 feet.